Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 124, part 4, Spotlight on the Spectre during the Ostrander-Mandrake run. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session. Following the Vlatava/Spear of Destiny story arc, John Ostrander and Tom Mandrake took some time before the 0 Hour event and the subsequent Desecration storyline to do some more world building for the Spectre and Jim Corrigan. Been a little while since I spoke about Detective Nate Kane, and Nate would become a crucial supporting character in the Spectre's series. Following 0 Hour, readers still saw him, I guess, more in a side sort of role. He was in Hot Water with Police Captain for first unintentionally divulging information about the Reaver serial killer to Amy Baderman, which then went public, and then he got himself in even more hot water by shooting the Reaver killer without bringing him in for questioning. So Nate wasn't having an easy time of it, as the captain said right out to Kane, "You've become a media darling, you're the hero cop. If it was up to me, I would take away your gun and your badge. But instead, Nate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bury you in the worst high-profile cases. And I'm just going to sit back and watch until it gets to be too much for you, and the media realizes that you can't be the hero all of the time. And basically, your image will be ruined in the face of the media and the public, and I'll be rid of you that way." But Kane, tough veteran that he was, fought the good fight and found himself becoming partners with Jim Corrigan. And it's a neat little bit of humor which Ostrander and Mandrake add to the series at this point, as we see Kane sitting at his office doing some paperwork. Captain comes up to him and says, "Kane, downtown sent you a new partner." And Nate says, "Wait a sec, I never requested the partner." And of course, it's Jim Corrigan there. And Nate, knowing who and what Jim Corrigan is exactly, puts two together, realizes that Jim Corrigan has some spectral version of the Jedi Force and has used his spectral powers to talk the powers that be into processing his paperwork and getting him back on the Force. And certainly in the last 20 plus issues of this run by Ostrander and Mandrake, we see this very interesting relationship developing between Corrigan and Kane. Wouldn't necessarily say that they become friends, but they certainly become partners, allies together. And Nate is exposed to so many things that would cause most people to question reality, to question the nature of justice and the soul. And Nate comes out of this in a very positive light. He's certainly one of the more enjoyable supporting characters I've come across in any comic series. But now, leading up to 0 Hour and the Desecration arc, Ostrander and Mandrake bring back two characters from the Spectre's Golden Age history. One, a more beloved character, and the other by no means beloved. First off, let's talk about the not-so-beloved character. You may recall when I was spotlighting the Spectre in the Golden Age, I spoke of how the character of Percival Popp, the super cop, has been blamed by many fans and comics historians as the cause of the decline of the Spectre in the Golden Age. As the Spectre's run in More Fun Comics came to an end, Percival Popp ended up becoming the star, with the Spectre being reduced to that of a guardian angel type sidekick. And here, Ostrander and Mandrake come up with a really interesting twist on the character of Percival Popp. And the story begins with the Spectre entering a cemetery and scaring off two kids who are contemplating suicide in order to, in their minds, honor their fallen grunge rock idol, who is clearly a very thinly veiled reference to Kurt Cobain of Nirvana. But after scaring the kids out of killing themselves, Jim Corrigan reflects that it wasn't these kids that made him feel compelled to come to the cemetery. It was something or someone else. And Corrigan soon learns who it is who compelled him to come to the cemetery. It's his former partner, J. Percival Poplansky, otherwise known by others on the force as Percival Popp, the super cop. And of course, that term super cop is directed towards Popp or Poplansky in an entirely sarcastic light. Here, Mr. Mandrake depicts Poplansky very differently than he appeared in the Golden Age. Here, Mr. Mandrake reinterprets Poplansky as a blonde-haired, stocky police officer. He certainly has a very innocent look about him, a very friendly look, but you can just tell it from the look on Popp that he's out of shape, and he's someone who quite likely trips over his own feet at the worst of times. And so Corrigan's quite surprised to see Popp, who looks like he's still somewhere in his late 20s, early 30s. And Poplansky begins to reminisce about his first interactions with Jim Corrigan. Poplansky recalls that Corrigan was taking down a crime ring in a warehouse, and Poplansky came along. He ended up tripping over his own feet and causing a bit of noise in the warehouse, which normally would have blown Corrigan's cover. But in this case, Poplansky's bungling actually resulted in Corrigan not getting shot and mortally wounded by one of the criminals who he was trying to take down. And so Poplansky recalls that back at the precinct, while Corrigan's partner, Waylon Grant, was talking about Poplansky being on the force thanks to having a corrupt politician for a father who basically bought his son a badge, it's Corrigan who says to Waylon, simmer down. The kid's all right. I appreciate what he did for me. Poplansky recalls that he was there on the fateful night when Jim Corrigan was killed by Gat Benson and his men. And Popp explains that he wanted to intervene, but he fell faint at the worst moment, and when he came to, it appeared that Corrigan was already dead. Somehow Popp managed to make his way to the warehouse where Benson and his men were holding Waylon and Clarice Winston, and Popp observed through a window the spectral figure of Jim Corrigan entering the warehouse and committing holy terror and vengeance upon Benson and his men. And Popp tried to back away quietly, but he ended up again tripping over himself and creating enough of a stir that Corrigan realized that there was somebody who was watching all that had gone on. Poplansky recalls that he laid low at the precinct, tried not to cross paths with Corrigan, but then one day Corrigan called him into the office. And beautiful artwork by guest artist John Ridgway. Ridgway shows that very early in Corrigan's time as the Spectre, he was already giving in to the Spectre's angry, vengeful side. And so we see in the artwork that Corrigan's eyes have the flaming skulls where there should be pupils. And Corrigan's basically trying to scare a confession of Poplansky. And Pop admits to Corrigan that he suspects that Corrigan is dead and is a walking ghost. But he assures Corrigan that he will not tell anybody what he knows. And Corrigan says that that's a good thing because in order for him to carry out his mission, Corrigan is going to have to, from time to time, pretend that he is still alive. The only problem Corrigan has is he's not quite sure how to go about performing his mission in public because he has to conceal the fact that he's dead. And I mean, essentially, he doesn't want people to realize that he's this supernatural being now. He wants to live some semblance of the life he lived before, even if it's for a pretense. And so Pop has a pretty neat idea for Corrigan. Pop says, well, look at all these other costumed mystery men running around. Why don't you just wear a costume? And when people look at you, they'll say, oh, that guy's a superhero, but he's just dressed up like a ghost. He isn't really a ghost. He just looks like one. And Pop shows Corrigan or a sketch of a costume which he has designed for Corrigan to wear. And Pop must have been channeling some divine inspiration because the sketch which he has made really is the Spectre's iconic look. And Corrigan looks at the drawing and he notices that Pop has scribbled some ideas for a superhero name for Corrigan. But again, those flaming skulls come back into Corrigan's eyes and he says, I know who I am. And there in his office, in front of Pop, Corrigan transforms for the first time into the Spectre. And he says, I am the Spectre. Poplansky then goes on to reminisce about the time that he spent as Jim Corrigan's partner. And he remembers that as time passed, Corrigan was spending less and less time at the precinct. And eventually, the Spectre would work full-time with the JSA before eventually disappearing from the scene altogether. And Pop explains that after his time with Corrigan and the Spectre was over, he was dismissed from the force. The explanation was that there needed to be jobs for men who were returning from the war. But Poplansky realized that it was because of his father's crooked political affiliations that he was having the badge taken away from him. But there were no hard feelings. Pop explains that he went on to work as a night security guard for a number of years and was very capable at the job. He also rented a room in a boarding house for unmarried men, thinking something along the lines of a YMCA. And Pop explains that somewhere around 30 years ago, he passed away. And he's been haunting this cemetery ever since. And Corrigan says to Poplansky, why? Why are you still here? Why haven't you moved on? And Pop says, well, I'm figuring, Jim, since you're dead and I'm dead, we could just become partners again. And imagine what a team we would make. And Corrigan says,